In 1925, a man sold the Eiffel Tower. Not as a joke, not as a metaphor. He found a buyer, collected the money, and disappeared before the man realized what had happened. Then he came back, found a second buyer, and tried to do it again. This is not a story about audacity. This is a story about a man who understood people so precisely that he could make them sell themselves, who never needed to lie about the Eiffel Tower, because by the time the deal closed, his victims were lying to themselves. Victor Lustig didn't con people out of their money. He conned them out of their own judgment, and most of them never admitted it happened. Paris in 1925 was a city held together with pride and rust. The Eiffel Tower had been standing for 36 years past its intended lifespan. Built as a temporary structure, never meant to last. The metal was corroding, maintenance costs were climbing, and the French press had been running stories for months about what the city was going to do about it. Lustig read those stories carefully. He had a gift for finding the gap between what a situation appeared to be and what it actually was. What he saw in those articles, in the bureaucratic anxiety about iron and municipal budgets, was not a problem. It was a door. He had fake government stationery printed, invented a title, Deputy Director General of the Ministère des Postes, then sent personal invitations to 6 of the city's most prominent scrap metal dealers. Private meeting, confidential matter, government business. All 6 showed up. He told them the tower was coming down. The city had decided quietly, he explained, to avoid public outcry. The demolition contract, the scrap rights, would go to one man in this room. Discretion was essential. The dealers believed him, not because the story was airtight, because it felt exactly like the kind of decision a government would make, behind closed doors, handed to the right man, without ceremony. Lustig looked like the right man. He spoke like the right man. He had already decided which of the 6 he was going to take. His name was André Poisson. Successful, but not quite successful enough, which is precisely why Lustig chose him. Poisson was the kind of man who had spent his career standing just outside the rooms where real decisions were made. Close enough to know those rooms existed, far enough to feel it. A man like that doesn't just want a business opportunity. He wants proof that he finally belongs. Lustig gave him the tour, rode with him in a government car to the base of the tower, walked the structure with the quiet authority of someone for whom this was routine. Poisson asked questions. Lustig answered some and deflected others, not evasively, but the way a senior official deflects, with the implication that certain things don't require explanation at this level. Poisson was close. Lustig could feel it. Then Poisson hesitated. His wife had concerns. Something felt slightly off. Not wrong, but off. He couldn't name it. He told Lustig. This is the moment a scam should have collapsed. A hesitating buyer, a wife asking questions, doubt in the room. Lustig let the silence hold for exactly as long as it needed to. Then he leaned forward, lowered his voice, and asked Poisson, with visible discomfort, if he could speak frankly. He explained that his government salary was, as Poisson might understand, not quite proportional to his responsibilities. That certain arrangements, discreet, entirely customary, were sometimes necessary to move a contract through the right channels. He was asking for a bribe. And that was the moment Poisson stopped being suspicious. Because a man asking for a bribe is not performing. A man asking for a bribe has needs, weaknesses, something to lose. The request didn't make Lustig look corrupt, it made him look real. It made the whole operation look like the genuine, slightly dirty machinery of government that Poisson had always assumed existed beneath the surface. He paid, the contract, the bribe, all of it. Lustig thanked him, shook his hand, and left Paris within 24 hours. Poisson discovered the truth days later. No demolition, no contract, no deputy director general. Just a man who had read his ambition precisely enough to sell it back to him. He did not go to the police. Think about that. He had been defrauded of an enormous sum. He had a name, a description, a paper trail. Legal recourse was available to him. He stayed quiet, because going to the police meant explaining exactly what had happened, how completely he had believed it, how much he had wanted to believe it, how the bribe, the thing that should have alarmed him, was the thing that made him trust it more. The shame wasn't only that he had been fooled. The shame was that somewhere he had understood it was too good and chosen to believe it anyway. Lustig had calculated this too. He didn't just build a con that worked, he built a con that stayed buried. Here is the part that is almost impossible to process. Weeks later, Lustig returned to Paris with a second set of invitations. New stationery, new dealers. Same government car, same quiet authority, same story about iron and maintenance costs, and a decision the city didn't want made public. He tried to sell the Eiffel Tower again. The second attempt failed. One of the dealers went to the police, and Lustig was gone before they found him. But he had tried. Knowing the first con had nearly come apart, knowing the city was now watching, knowing the fiction had already been exposed once, he tried anyway. Not because he was reckless, because he had looked at the structure of human vanity and concluded, correctly, that somewhere in Paris there was another man who had spent his career standing outside the right rooms. He was almost right. He had been running versions of this his entire life. He grew up in a border town that changed names depending on who was drawing the maps. He learned early that identity was a decision, not a fact. 5 languages, not for education, but for access. He crossed the Atlantic more than 50 times, running quiet manipulations on passengers who never saw it coming, because men who consider themselves sophisticated rarely do. He called himself the Count. He kept a notebook, inside it, written by hand, a list he called his rules, not of fraud, of people. How to listen more than you speak. How to make a man feel he is the most interesting person in the room. How to become a mirror. How to show someone exactly what they need to see. He wasn't selling wealth, he was selling recognition. The feeling of being seen, truly seen, by someone who matters. And once a man has that feeling, he will bend his own logic to protect it. That was always the product. Once he walked into a meeting with Al Capone and asked for $50,000 for a securities deal. Capone, a man whose survival depended on reading people faster than they could read him, gave it to him. 2 months later, Lustig returned the full $50,000. The deal had fallen through. No profit, no explanation, just the money back. Capone didn't know what to do with that, so he gave Lustig $5,000 as a gesture of goodwill, which was the only money Lustig ever intended to take. There was no deal. There was only a calculation that the one thing a man like Capone could not resist was someone who returned his money without being asked. The $5,000 was Capone paying to feel, briefly, like he was in the presence of an equal. Same product, different city. He was arrested in 1935, convicted of counterfeiting American currency on an industrial scale, sentenced to 20 years, sent to Alcatraz. He escaped from a federal detention center before the trial. They caught him. In 1947, he died in prison of pneumonia. On his death certificate, under occupation, someone had written, "Apprentice Salesman." It is unclear whether this was error or a joke. Either way, it is the most honest thing ever written about him. A man who spent his entire life selling things that didn't exist. Not the tower, not the securities, not the count, not the government car, not the quiet authority of someone who belongs in a room. None of it was real, except in the minds of the people who needed it to be. Most of his victims never reported it. They absorbed the loss, restructured their memory of what happened, found a way to believe they had simply made a bad investment, because the alternative was harder to live with. That someone had looked at them clearly, had identified exactly what they wanted to be, and used that, with precision, without hesitation, as the point of entry. Lustig never broke into anyone's life. He was always invited in, always offered a seat at the table. The people who lost everything to him did so willingly, completely, often gratefully. So tell me this, if someone offered you the one thing that proved you finally belonged, would you really say no? The door was never locked. It was held open. Subscribe to Void and Shadows. The dark stories don't stop here.